Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. So nice to have you all here today. Thank you for taking the time to join us. All right. So we're going to continue to let people in from our waiting room, but thank you everyone who's been able to join us here today. My name is Laurel Ramirez and I'm the head of school here at UWC Thailand. While we wait for people to trickle in from the waiting room, if you haven't done so already, please consider renaming yourself in the chat so that we can see who we have joining us here today. And if you feel comfortable doing so, please turn your camera on, and that helps us create much more of a sense of community. Megan, I would especially love to see you up on that screen. There you are. Hi, Megan. Thanks everyone for coming in. It's going to be a wonderful conversation today, and we're really pleased to have you here. All right. Perfect. Thank you so much. All right, Colin, if you want to jump to the next slide. We're going to go ahead and get going for today because we've got a lot to cover as we talk about the case for personal challenge with our guest speakers. Both of our guest speakers are going to appear spotlighted on your screen now, and we have two amazing speakers joining us today. First, we have our Director of Outdoor Experiential Education here at UWC Thailand, Rob Carmichael, who is going to be sharing with us what he's learned after his 19 years working and studying in the field of outdoor education. He's been fulfilling that work in the UK, Ireland, the USA, South Korea, China, and Thailand. And that conversation is going to be enriched by our guest speaker, Dylan Haskin. Full disclosure, Dylan is a very good friend of mine. He and I have had amazing adventures together, and I, with much joy in my heart, watch his adventures from afar. Dylan is a professional photographer, videographer, and lover of adventures. Throughout his life, he has done multiple adventures like cycling a BMX across the Himalayas and bicycle touring with his dog in Central America. Dylan's also worked all over the world on various film and photo projects for the past 11 years. Today, Dylan and Rob are going to be talking to us about the case for personal challenge, and it's going to be a really interesting conversation. Before we get going with the content of our webinar today, I'm going to run you through just some logistics for our time together. If you can help to keep your microphone on mute, that would be wonderful so that we're able to hear our speakers as they share with us today. As I said earlier, for those that came in a little bit later, if you feel comfortable changing the name on your screen so that we know who you are and turning your video on, that's always really lovely. So we build community during our webinar today. You are welcome to engage with our participants throughout the webinar experience today. So feel free to, at any point in time, if you're really connecting with what our speakers are sharing and you want to add a comment into the chat, feel free to do so. If you have any questions that you come up with as our speakers are sharing, put those into the chat as well. We're going to leave a good amount of time at the end of the conversation today to be able to address people's questions and bring in some answers to those. So please do engage with our topic and our participants as they're sharing, and we'll make sure we get to your comments and questions at the end. During our question and answer session, we will also welcome you to go ahead and ask that question verbally by raising your virtual hand. And so please feel free to do that as well as adding it into the chat. You're also very welcome to use the reactions that are at the bottom of your screen. So if you love what you're hearing, you can throw a heart up on the screen or any of the other emotions available at the bottom of your screen to just be able to give some feedback to our presenters as they're going along. Alrighty, and with all of that said, I think we're going to go ahead and move into the content of our presentation. More than anything, I want to start by kind of grounding us in some of the founding principles of a UWC education by starting with a quote from our founder, Kurt Hahn. If you're a part of UWC, you hear this quote on a regular basis. There is more in us than we know. If we can be made to see it, perhaps for the rest of our lives, we will be unwilling to settle for less. Rob and I were talking about the topic of personal challenge prior to today's webinar. And, you know, for me as a head of school, it's a really, really important part of my life. I've found it to be something that really nurtures my soul and drives me forward in life. No matter, I think, how professional or how old we become, that child at heart still wants to have adventures. And so I think it's a really beautiful topic to be able to cover today. As I've said, I really enjoyed my friendship with Dylan over the years. We used to live, Dylan and his wife Megan and my husband and I, close to each other in Costa Rica, had some really incredible adventures together while we were there. And it's an important thing, I think, throughout your life to take adventure with you and to do amazing things. And so I hope that you come away from our conversation today really inspired by what you hear from both Rob and Dylan, and considering perhaps an adventure that you would like to take. So before I hand off to Rob and Dylan, maybe you can drop into the chat, what is the adventure you are dying to take? Quick location, where would you go? What would you do? Throw it into the chat. If you could have a personal challenge adventure, what is that adventure that you'd love to have? You can throw those in now. Well, Claire, you already achieved your adventure then by moving to Phuket and working with us here. Lots of sailing that people are hoping to do. Yeah. Oh my goodness, having a child is the biggest adventure of all, that's for sure. Oh, Megan, I want to do the PCT too. We should do that together. Lots of hiking, cycling. Oh, wonderful. Yes, anyone in Shanghai right now must be dreaming of adventure in the midst of lockdown. Ooh, trekking the Himalayas. That's something Dylan might be able to share with you. Something ticked off his box to a certain extent. Oh, wonderful. All right, continue to throw those into the chat. We're all going to get inspired and excited for our adventures to come as we look and see all of these wonderful dreams that we have of our visitors. And without further ado, I'm going to hand off to Rob and Dylan to get us even further inspired with the adventures that we might consider when we take that case for personal challenge and we put it into action.
Thank you, Laurel. That's a very nice introduction there. So hi everyone, I'm Rob, and as Laurel said, I'm the Director of Outdoor Experiential Education here at the school. And in my role, I am really lucky. I get to help facilitate wonderful, challenging experiences for all of our students here. Now, one of the things that was clear from the little chat boxes and going through is that personal challenges can look very different for different individuals. And that's something that we try to highlight here. The opportunity to engage in a challenge that is personal for you. Now, in my role here as the Director of Outdoor Education, we get to facilitate these challenges in some of the really cool environments that we go into around Phuket and southern Thailand. And those adventures take on all different shapes and sizes, be it from sailing to coral reef management, where our students go through diving certification through PADI. It could be on multi-day expeditions like our grade 9 students who do a 9-day kayaking expedition around the island. There's all sorts and shapes of forms that these take, but at the heart of each of one of those, it's actually very student-centered. So whenever those students are about to go on an expedition or about to go on a journey, it's within the context of what's important for them. So prior to taking part in an expedition, prior to going out on one of these amazing outdoor experiences, is that the student themselves actually gets to set their own goals in their homeroom classes. So that's kind of how it looks a little bit here. But again, to go back to the why do we engage with personal challenge? Why do we want to do things that are hard and difficult for us? Well, as you can see on the slide, one of the things that we see and we believe in here is that it does awaken our minds. It does awaken our spirits. It makes us realize what inner resources that we might have and the abilities that we might have that presently we might be unaware of. And like any good educational theory, it is based in solid science. We know that for a student to grow, for any individual to grow, that challenge is essential. If we find ourselves living the same day, being not pushed out of our comfort zone, then we will struggle to grow. We will struggle to move on and develop ourselves. Now, I know, Dylan, you've done many really cool adventures. Maybe it's a good opportunity to pass to you to maybe describe some of the trips that you've been on.
Yeah, thank you again, everyone, as well, for having me. Thank you, Laurel. It's really nice to see you again after all the years. And yeah, Rob, it's been also like really nice to meet you over the past couple of weeks while we've been planning for this. But yeah, I think if I'm thinking about like the why for me for these kind of adventures, or the sort of putting myself in a personal challenge kind of situation, it's always been, I've always had this idea of like looking back at my life, like one day, like when I'm really old, and the kind of things that I want to look back on. So almost kind of trying to put myself ahead in the future and be like, if I look back on my life, what are the kind of things that I would love to have done? Like what is going to be for me like valuable? And if I look back just from now back on things that I've done, it's always the times that I've put myself out of my comfort zone that are the fond memories. They are the things where I like challenge myself. So for example, we briefly mentioned the BMX trip that I did in the Himalayas. So the idea like for that was because I was looking for something that I felt hadn't been done before. I was looking for some kind of adventure that I felt was like a unique thing for me. And also it seemed at the time when I was that age that everyone was kind of making these comments that everything's been done, people have climbed Everest lots of times and all these things have been done. So I was trying to kind of like customize something for myself that was going to be hard for me to do and also something that was a bit different. So the idea was basically we cycled. I went like with my dad. He was on a normal bicycle and I went on a BMX, and we cycled 1,000 miles, just over 1,000 miles across the Himalayas, and we did it in about a month. And I mean, it was that whole question about like the why was something that I thought about often, like during the trip as well, because it's one of those things that I don't know. I seem to often question myself, like while I'm doing it, is like, why am I doing this? Because it's very hard, or because it seems like it's a silly thing to do. And I, like for me, it was always that thing about looking forward and being like one day this is going to be something that was, a special experience. And then I guess the other thing is just for me, it's a personal growth thing. It is like, I don't feel like I grow at all when I'm in a comfort zone. If I look back to times in my life where I was extremely comfortable, there's not much that happened. It was not much to think back on. Everything was going fine and it was just very comfortable. So for me, it's been super important to be conscious about keeping on, because I want to grow. It's been important for me to like keep putting myself out of my comfort zone, to be looking for different ways of doing it. And it's not always a way that is necessarily like physical, but there are, like we were saying, there's like various ways of putting yourself out of your comfort zone, giving yourself personal challenges. And yeah, it's important to have fun with that idea, I think, as well. Yeah, so there's the BMX, gives you a bit of a context of the size. And we had to carry everything ourselves for a month. We could stop, at like restaurants and stuff to get food, but there's not that many often. So it was a very cool experience.
Were your knees just killing you, Dylan, from the angle of the small bike?
So the whole time I pretty much didn't sit down on the seat. It's too low. So you're just like standing up the whole time. And the only time I would sit down is on a downhill. And because Himalayas, like we would literally climb up a mountain pass for 3 days straight. Like for 3 days straight, it would just be climbing, 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 climbing. And then we would have like a full day the next day of only downhill. We just sitting and freewheeling all the way down. So yeah, I didn't have any injuries, or like my knees were fine, but I wasn't really sitting down much on that seat.
And then braking on a BMX down a hill, how's that work?
Yeah, so that was the one thing. It was quite hard to get a BMX to where we were living at that time. We ended up importing one from India and we like found it eventually. And when the bike came, it only had a back brake. It didn't have a front brake. And so what I would do on the downhill is I would use, because the back brake doesn't work that well on a steep downhill, and I guess the BMX brakes aren't just that good anyway. So I would use my front foot as well I would like put my foot on the front like tire for those emergency brake situations, or trying to not go off the edge of a cliff or something like that.
Dylan, that's really funny. It reminds me, and a quote a friend of mine just shared with me yesterday was that you never remember your best day of TV. And I think that's so apt for this as well. You know, in
Yeah.
order to create those memories, I just think it's great. Colin, would you mind going to the next slide, please? So I think that leads us in really well to what these personal challenges might actually look like for us. Now, again, to bring it back into the context of what we do here at UWC Thailand or within an educational setting, what personal challenge might look like, specifically within an outdoor context, is that for us, one of the key things that we try to help students do is to embrace discomfort. And a key quote that you can often hear me saying around campus or when we're off campus to our students is try to feel comfortable being uncomfortable. Now, that might be I've got wet shoes, or I've got sand in my shoes, or I'm in a tiny boat that doesn't feel super comfortable if you're in a kayak or a small sailing dinghy. But it's being able to embrace that discomfort and going, oh yeah, it's not super comfortable, but it doesn't bother me. And we always try to share to the students that we also feel uncomfortable as a member of staff. I also have sand in my shoes. I'm also hot and sweaty, and it's one of those things that it can be developed. It is a skill that is built. So many of our students and students all around the world now go from their house to their car to their classroom, to the cafeteria, back to the classroom, back to the car, back to the house. And in each of those settings, it's air conditioned, it's very sterile. So in order to take them outside and to have them challenged in the everyday is really good. You don't have to, Dylan's adventures are fantastic, but you don't have to BMX through Nepal to embrace personal challenge. The thought that we might be able to have backyard adventures, we might be able to experience adversity and difficulties just in our everyday lives, and how quickly, especially our younger students, can adapt to them is incredible. One of the things that we do at school is an outdoor learning program where our students from preschool through to grade 1 spend a half day to a full day outside the classroom every single week. So they are in the national park, they're at our outdoor education center, or they're in the national park that's 800 meters from the school, or at the beach. So these students are in these spaces all the time. And what does the learning look like there? Well, it's taking the same classroom learning and applying it to an outdoor context. And it may be related to their unit of inquiry that they're studying in the PYP, or it may be a standalone lesson. And that will be up to the teacher. And usually with myself, we have a bit of a consultation to see what those learning experiences might look like. And whenever we are taken out of that sterile environment that we're so used to, the air conditioning, the cool car, the comfortable sofa, the nice chair, all this kind of stuff, and we're taken out of that area and we're put into a land that really not that long ago was part of our everyday life. Buildings with air conditioning haven't been around for that long, and being able to take students out of those settings, put them into the jungle where they're walking up through a river, for example, they're getting their feet wet, they're helping their classmates, and all the while developing this resilience, this grit that they maybe didn't even have a week beforehand or a couple of weeks beforehand, and layering these experiences time and time again to continue to build on how we deal with adversity, how we deal with discomfort, and again, allowing us to embrace that. And Dylan, maybe you can share some of your experiences of how you've embraced discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, there's been sort of a few different kinds of categories of like what kind of discomfort I like to give myself or to put myself into. And I have like the one sort of area of things which is like more like physical adventures. So it would be like going on that BMX trip, or when we lived in Costa Rica, then like Megan and I, we cycled around Costa Rica for a month with our dog. And then after that, I went through Panama and Costa Rica on my bike alone, also with the dog there. So there's those kind of like physical adventure kind of things. And then say if I look at like what I do for a living, like my work. So I'm a photographer and videographer. So in those kind of things, it would be looking at things like if I'm used to doing certain kinds of projects that are a certain size, or they're going to be going on this kind of platform, is to be looking at how can I push myself out of that comfort zone? Can I take on like bigger projects? Can I, like in the beginning when I would shoot with like a professional athlete, I was extremely nervous about just being around the presence of a professional athlete. And I was like nervous about that. So that was out of my comfort zone. But once I started doing that more, that sort of became, I was much more comfortable with that. So now it's like, okay, so how else can I keep pushing myself? Just to become like better at what I do. And also because I want to grow in the kind of work that I do as well. So it's kind of the adventure stuff. Then there's like the work kind of thing. And then on the other kind of personal thing, it's like challenges like this, like doing this talk right now is out of my comfort zone. It is something that I don't do very often. So it doesn't necessarily always have to be a physical thing for me to be going out, having adventures. Obviously, I love that too. But there are things like doing a talk like this. And I was speaking with Rob the other day too, and he was like, yeah, this is also for him. I'm not sure if it still is, Rob, but now you've been doing it a lot more. But this is like definitely out of my comfort zone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of the things as well that's really key to that, it's not just in the doing, but it's also in the reflecting upon the experience. Being able to take that time after having the journey, the challenge, the adventure, or even the webinar, and being able to reflect upon, okay, what did I learn from that? What do I know about myself? And what were the challenges that I actually overcome? Were the challenges that I thought were awaiting me actually there, or was it actually something else, and how it changed? And whenever you do these outdoor adventures specifically, you'll find that quite often the challenge that you thought was going to be there may be actually very different to what you ended up doing. And maybe Colin, if you can go to the next slide, please. You can see here in this picture, this is some of our grade 1 students. And they are, as I mentioned earlier, they are traveling up through a river. Now, what you see in this picture is incredible. You see young students striving to help a friend who is trying to overcome their own little challenge, how to get up the rocks in the river, how to get there. And they're working as a team, they're collaborating. There's some leadership skills being there. There's some, discussion on what the best way to do it. But what you don't see as well is these students, maybe a month beforehand, were very nervous about getting into the water at all. And the background to that and how they've developed through all of this is where there's real power in that. So maybe we go to the next one. And when we talk about this power, quite often synonymous with outdoor education is character building. Now, if you were to ask parents or teachers from most schools around the world, why do you believe in outdoor education? The answer will be, oh, it helps to build character. And some of these really common leadership traits, good communication skills, collaboration skills, the ability to develop perseverance, grit, and resilience. My question to a lot of educational institutions around the world is, how often does that happen? Now, for most schools around the world, outdoor education exists in a 5-day camp for secondary school students. For primary school students, maybe it happens as well, but not in all schools. But one of the things that I love about our program here is that outdoor education is built into the curriculum. It's built into the everyday. As I mentioned before, we have outdoor learning in our younger grades. We have camps that start in grade 1 with one night out, leading up right through to grade 9, grade 10, where they do like 9 and 10-day expeditions away. And each one of those camps getting a day longer each time. So it goes from 1 day to 2 days to 3 days, right the whole way up. And that's just the camp experiences. We also have the yearly outdoor curriculum where students learn to kayak, they learn to sail, all in school time. And then we have the after school programs that are available as well. We have the sailing club. We have an outdoor club that goes out at the weekend. We have coral reef management and a team set up for that. We have a team that takes care of mangroves as well. So there's opportunities within the curriculum, there's opportunities on the camp experiences, there's opportunities to engage with after school curriculums as well for the majority of our students right across the school. And I think it's through those repeated exposures to challenge, to uncertainty, to these new experiences where we can actually develop character. I think having the opportunity to go away for 5 days, well, spending 5 days is very difficult to reverse or change 15 years of conditioning. But whenever you're doing it on a weekly basis, or you're doing it on on an occasional basis, or a frequent basis, sorry, it's going to be much more impactful. And it's not just within the student body. It has to also be lived by the community, and be that from your head of school, like Laurel, who's took a several month cycling trip up through Central America, to colleagues that I work with who regularly compete in 10K ultra swims, ocean swims, and we have a number of our teaching staff who just finished a 145-kilometer race over the course of 5 hours. And these are people that you share an office with. These are people that are in your school on a regular basis, and they're living that idea of challenging themselves and helping students to realize, and sharing their own stories with students to inspire them as well. When it comes to developing that independence as well, we try to foster that as much as possible. And I like to use the 3Bs method for most of our students, where if you've got a problem, you try and sort it out by asking your brain. If your brain doesn't know, then maybe ask a buddy. And if you're really stuck, you can maybe ask a book and find out later. However, if you're really, really struggling, then there's always the fourth option, which is to come and ask the boss. I am quite glad and to say that happens less and less. The more students are outside, the more you foster that ability for them to solve the problem by themselves, to overcome that. We don't try and snowplow all their problems out of the way. Leave them there so that they can learn and grow from them. And we're obviously there to help support in a holistic way as well. Dylan, maybe you can add to that.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the words like character building, it's like a process. It's not something that just appears in one go. You are putting things on top of each other, like building on your previous experiences. So I think often when people have done something that seems quite big, that's sort of the main, it's like looking at the house once it's complete. People are seeing the house, but they're not seeing that, there was a process of there was like a building process that created the house. Like for example, with the BMX trip, that wasn't the first time I'd ever done a long bicycle trip. I hadn't done one as long as that, and I hadn't done it. I had done one on a BMX before, but it was only for like one day. I had done other like multiple day trips on a regular bicycle. And as a kid, I would go do like the multi-day rides with my dad. So it was like a process of like building up to that. It wasn't just I went out of nowhere and all of a sudden did the BMX trip. So I think it's almost important to look at it, if you are wanting to do things, or if you are seeing things that other people have done, it's to kind of consider for yourself, if you want to do something, let's like build up to that. Let's not go too far out of the comfort zone that the house ends up falling down. And also if you are looking at things that other people have done, because I've also found there's almost like a fine line between being inspired by somebody and feeling quite like demotivated by something that they do, because you're like, oh, I'll never be able to do that. It's going to be like that's impossible. But if you just keep that in mind, that even for that person who did this thing, it was a process for them to get there. It wasn't just out of the blue. And yeah, I think that's just my one like takeaway from that specific character building thing. It's like a process.
Yeah, absolutely. If we go to the next slide, please. So inevitably, whenever we talk about outdoor experiences and asking, students to go beyond their comfort zones, one of the things that comes up time and time again, and rightly so, is risk. And how do you manage risk? I always come back to my key philosophy is that if we don't ask students to engage with risk, then they're not going to know how to manage it as they go through their life. And that will lead to ultimately two things. One, they will fear away from it and they will never go near any risk whatsoever. Or two, they will take things on and they have no experience in managing risk or being aware of it. So they'll make a mistake and they will engage with it too much. And this is specifically true for teenagers. And I'm sure there's loads of statistics out there about the risky behavior of teenagers and young adults as they grow up. But if you are taught from an early age of how to manage risk, being aware of it, and knowing how to understand it and mitigate it, then you have a much better opportunity of continuing to engage with it in a much more healthy manner. And to this end, there's also the idea of real risk versus perceived risk. Now, this is something as a facilitator of these experiences that we can engage with. Now, when it comes to real risk, where something is hazardous, then we take steps to mitigate it. So for example, if we go kayaking, we make sure that we have a ratio of 6 students per 1 instructor on the water. We all wear buoyancy aids. If we're going sailing in our dinghies, we wear helmets. We have options to mitigate where the real risk is. Now, for the students, that does very little to mitigate the perceived risk, and that's okay. Having the students perceive that there's risk involved actually encourages them to engage with the process a lot more. Now, again, as a facilitator, we can either dial up or dial down that experience. And a great example that I always come back to is climbing. If I have a very able climber who is super confident and they know what they're doing and they're happy to engage with it, I will leave a little bit more slack on the rope. Now, they're still safe. The real risk is minor because they're still on a rope, they're still safe. But if we give them that extra length of rope, they do feel they're slightly more engaged. It feels like there's more risk. In the same way, we can dial it down for a climber who is perhaps less experienced. If they're fearful of heights, we keep the tension on the rope. We keep it tight. So their perceived risk may still be high for them, but at least they've got more security in knowing that they feel that there's that the risk is mitigated more for them. And we can do that in a number of situations and scenarios. But it comes back to making sure that the students are aware of what the hazards are and how to mitigate those and what that looks like. And we talk to the students depending on the grade level, more or less with that. With our students who are in the Duke of Ed program, for example, or grade 9, 10, 11 students who are going through their Duke of Edinburgh award, we talk to them very much, and we have sessions on risk awareness and management, and we talk them through the process about how we do this, and we're very direct about it. With our younger students, it's less formal. Tagged at the bottom there is a little star, parent perception, and this came out, and Dylan's laughing as well. This came out from a conversation that Dylan and I had. We were both aware. It doesn't matter, apparently, that if you're 4 years old or you're 40 years old. Yeah, parents worry, and this is evident both in my own experiences with my mom and Dylan with his, that if we're going to go on an adventure, your mom's going to ask, is everything safe? Is it okay? To which my response to my mother is, I hope so. I organized this. So it's certainly something that we can take in. And Dylan, maybe you can talk about how you manage risk on your experiences.
Yeah, that was a very interesting thought about specifically like with my mom, because obviously because she cares about me and she's worried, but she has a very high sense of what the perceived risk is, as opposed to what the actual risk is. Or also just on a side note, like my mom is a nurse and she's seen people come into hospital in all kinds of conditions, so it might not be as perceived as I might think also. But yeah, as far as like for me so obviously you are creating a situation with the children to kind of like facilitate the risk for them, so you can expand it and make it less based on like what they need. So if you're thinking of say going out on your own mission, there's not necessarily that kind of like facilitation happening. So I've saw some people, making comments on here, they would like to go hike a specific trail or go and like sail around the world and those kind of things. And on my kind of adventures, the kind of things that I've tried to think of is like, obviously there is some real risk, but now how can I bring that down, or what is perceived risk and what is real risk? And for me, it's been important sort of I think there's like a planning element that's important to, obviously you can't plan everything, but you can definitely be as prepared as you can. So it was like planning, say for instance, with the BMX trip, we planned a route. We didn't just go out not knowing in which direction we were going to go at all. We had a plan for the route. We looked at the weather conditions for that time of the year, so we had the appropriate clothes, so we're not, again, making an unnecessary risk a real risk. And then there's the thing of a perceived risk, which is interesting because that's also from your perspective. And things, it's almost like that as you gradually go out of your comfort zone, something that is a perceived risk, you kind of realize if it is one or not. And to people who haven't been like building those things, the perceived risk might be very high, but for you, it's actually not. So I've always considered myself, I'm not a reckless person. And I think that's quite a big difference between, even though maybe I'll do something that has a perceived risk of that it's high, like for me, it's not. And I think if you do something that actually has a real risk that's high, then you're kind of more leaning towards a reckless kind of like way of being. And then, there's a big chance of something going wrong. But so it's, to me, it was definitely like the planning. And then obviously, the more you do these kind of things, it's also, you kind of like weigh in on your previous experiences on things. So if I've done a 5-day trip, now you're going to do a month trip, you can apply things that you learned from those ones, and that also brings down the risk. But then interesting, just like 2 little stories, there was like times when the perceived risk for me seemed very low, and actually it was a high risk situation. So I was hiking up, there's a volcano in Nicaragua on Ometepe Island. There's like 2 of them, but the one you can hike up. So I decided to go up on my own, and I was hiking up. It was very misty and everything was fine. Everything looked for me fine. And at one point I got to, because it's a volcano, it gets more and more steep as you're going up, because it kind of goes like slanting and it goes steep. And I got to a point where I didn't realize, I had the perceived risk that this was actually fine, but all of a sudden I realized actually where I was like standing, and it was sort of on the edge of this like ridge with 2 things going down either side, and I'd realized I'd actually gone like too far for what I was actually comfortable with, and I was in a bad place. I should have taken a totally different route. Luckily I realized it then, although for me it was already like too late. So I went back down, but it was this interesting like moment of when the real risk sort of adjusted the perceived risk down a lot very quickly. And then there was another situation it's almost the opposite. So we were in Zambia doing a filming project, and we're basically looking for a lion that had a collar on, and they needed to adjust the collar, because the collar, they sometimes have like a tracking collar on the lions to kind of keep an idea where they are. So this lion had the collar on while it was still quite young, and had now grown, so it was a little bit tight. We had to go and like find this lion. Anyway, like long story short, what happened was our whole team got extremely lost. We got like 3 flat tires. We had to abandon the vehicle that we were with, and we were in the middle of a jungle with actual like wild animals around, and we didn't really know what to do. So we eventually found a tree that we could sit with, and 2 of the most experienced people decided they're going to try and walk back, and we're going to wait there. And the place that we were it was in the middle of the day. There was a nice tree. It was like really good weather. Everything was very peaceful. So the perceived risk of that situation is actually quite low, because everything is good. There's nothing that's wrong. You can't see any wild animals, but there was actually a very high real risk, whether those 2 people would be able to find their way back or not, whether some, a big herd of elephants all of a sudden come through. So there's interesting situations when you can kind of have the opposite, when the perceived risk looks all fine, but actually there's quite a high real risk. Obviously, just to end the story, we ended up getting found by a group of trackers who had been tracking us since the day before when we were supposed to come back, and we didn't. and they came around a couple of hours later, and we were extremely happy to see them.
Yeah, it's great. And I think, one of those things as well, whenever we move beyond the idea of we're dealing with students and we're engaging with personal adventures, it's quite well documented actually by a lot of adventurers, is that if everything goes to plan and I'm an expeditionist, then oh yeah, it was okay. It was an okay experience. However, whenever be it you're kayaking, Bass Strait from Australia to Tasmania or whatever, if everything goes to plan all the way, you're like, yeah, it was fun. It was a fun experience. But you're almost when you're experienced, you're waiting for the wind to pick up. You're waiting for that little bit of misdirection so that you can engage with your own sense of peak adventure. Because we talk adventure exists on a scale, and we've got a fun experience, and then we've got adventure, and then we've got peak adventure, and then beyond peak adventure we got misadventure, and that's when it goes too far. And quite often, whenever you're trying to find that peak area, especially if you are an experienced expeditionist, then you're always searching for that peak, and that peak can quite often be found whenever things are not going correctly, they're not going as planned, but you rely upon your experience, you rely upon the skills that you've gained over years of doing these and building up to it, to make it actually, it still can become a quality experience, which actually leads into our next slide quite well. If we go ahead, well, in this picture you could see a really good example, a photographic example of real risk versus perceived risk. So this is a very popular belay point, an abseil in Riley Beach, where we take a lot of our students to. Now, looking at that abseil looks like it's about 300 meters. And to our students, whenever they come up into the cave, it certainly looks 300 meters, but we tell them it's not. We tell them it's only 30 meters. And then once they're out over the edge in their engagement, oh yeah, actually it's 30 meters down to a shelf, which we hiked down from. But I think it's a fantastic way of highlighting real risk versus perceived risk. But it's a great photo opportunity, if nothing else. To go back to that idea of peak adventure versus misadventure, this is where we kind of build into the idea of type 2 fun. Now, we talk about type 1 fun and type 2 fun, but I'd like to touch on type 3 fun as well, building on just what Dylan said. Type 3 fun is misadventure. Type 3 fun is not fun at all. Type 3 fun is whenever an expedition goes a little bit too far, okay? And this happens quite a lot with experienced expeditionists, people who are going and they're pushing themselves to the very limit. They are challenging themselves personally, and sometimes that can happen. What we deal quite often with within a school context is type 1 fun and type 2 fun. Now, type 1 fun is that immediate rush, that is going on a roller coaster, that is doing an abseil, that is, something that you get instantaneous gratification from. That's type 1 fun. Now, type 2 fun is a little bit different. Type 2 fun is the kind of fun that you get from doing something that's really difficult. Be that a 4-day cycling expedition with our Gold Duke of Edinburgh group that we do here. Those students in grade 11 and grade 12, they will cycle for 4 days, about 300 kilometers over the course of that. I'm sure if you ask them on that expedition as they were riding along, are you having fun right now? The answer very rarely will be yes. However, the reflective experience, that reflective enjoyment, the enjoyment they can get out of the storytelling of adventure is very much alive and well. I can't even tell the story without smiling. One of my favorite hiking experiences was in Wales in December, which is not an enjoyable place to be because it's cold and wet. And me and some friends of mine, we spent 4 days hiking in the rain. And from the moment we got off the bus to the moment we got back on the bus 4 days later, it rained every step of the way. I can't stop smiling about that experience because the reflective enjoyment, the enjoyment that you get from participating in difficult things with friends is fantastic. It's how these not fun experiences actually can become fun. And I think it is something that we try to tap into. Especially, again, another great example is our grade 9 kayaking experience that we run for a camp. The students go on a 9-day kayaking experience along the coastlines of Phuket. We have a couple of service days in there too, where we're not on the water, but the majority of it's spent in the boat. And the reflective enjoyment, even at the end of the day around the campfire, when we're sharing our stories, when we're sharing our successes from the day, when we're sharing the things that we find difficult, it can be felt very much alive then. The laughter that surrounds that campfire in the evening is amazing. I don't know, Dylan, do you want to maybe quickly describe some of the type 2 fun that you've had?
Yeah, I mean, I guess a lot of the things that I've done over the last while have been more like type 2 fun, but I think for me the big thing has sort of to be, the more that I've done it is the more I've sort of begun to become aware of the type 2 fun while it's happening. So if you, for example, doing a triathlon or something like that, it might not feel very fun while you're doing it, but the more you do triathlons, the more you're going to start realizing, this is, even though I'm not like enjoying it, this is actually something that I do want to do, and I am enjoying it. I know I'm probably only going to enjoy it afterwards more, but so you kind of bring this awareness to the type 2 fun as opposed to just feeling like this isn't fun at all. But yeah, I mean, like the BMX trips and all those kind of things, there's a lot it's also not the whole time. There's like moments of real, like having like type 2 fun where you're like, this isn't fun at all, I don't know why I'm doing this. And then it's important for me to not make big like life choices when I'm in that space, because then you end up like canceling something that you didn't actually want to cancel. You know, you like end your race, or you like stop going up the mountain that you actually like the next day you're like, oh, but I actually did want to do that. And yeah, so
and that's where the challenge
yeah,
right?
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
And it's having that challenge and setting that goal at the beginning, knowing that when you get to the end of it, that's what you wanted to achieve, right?
Yeah. And like you said as well, you kind of like touched on it as well, doing it in a group. There's like such a bonding experience that happens during a type 2 fun experience with other people. There's something I've been on even that, for example, that like trip in Zambia when I was with a group of people and we were lost and all that kind of thing. I had only just met those people. I was on the trip with them for a week, but I've made like lifelong friends just because of that one like little like short experience together. And yeah, there's something that it's very hard to explain how you can create such a strong connection with people in such a short time.
Yeah, which and that the group aspect is something that we might touch upon next. Still on another cycling trip.
Yeah, it's also BMX trip.
So one of the things that we've discussed a lot of what we feel the benefits of personal challenge are from the beginning of this conversation, but I'd also like to touch on a couple of other things that maybe we haven't addressed a lot. Being engaged in those personal challenges, specifically with an outdoor and adventure context, there is so many opportunities for creative thinking to be to put into practice, be it from, oh my goodness, my tent has just been blown into a pond, which happened on one of our kayaking expeditions. We were on the water and a storm came through, and when we arrived back at the campsite, we found that, oh, someone didn't put the pegs down properly in their tent, and they had to fish it out of the pond. And some creative experiences that we had to go through to overcome those challenges. And being able to see that if I can get through the challenge in this environment, what else and where else in my life can I apply the same mindset to? The transferable skills that you're taking from it. And on the idea of transferable skills, the leadership, the collaborative and the cooperative experiences that our students go through on a regular basis, again, not just this one short trip once a year, but continually throughout the year, be it within a classroom context here at school, or be it in the national park, or be it when we're sailing or kayaking or rock climbing or doing any of your other outdoor learning classes. And building that perseverance, that resilience, that determination, that grit. And as Dylan referenced at the very beginning of why he wants to engage, that making the most of your time. And maybe if we can just go to the next slide, I'd like to give a fantastic example. And the students involved here, I've been recently speaking with them and their parents, who were happy for us to share this story as well. We have a group of students here, our grade 9 students, on their kayaking expedition. If you look closely at the picture, you'll see our student at the front is a student from the school, and she has disability. She has no forearms, but she does have some digits at the end of her elbow. She partook in this kayaking expedition, this multi-day kayaking expedition, and not once was there a complaint. Not once was there a complaint from her about the difficulty that she faced. Did she say she was tired? Yes. Did she complain about having to do the activity? Absolutely not. She has developed this resilience, this perseverance to overcome these difficulties. And you find this quite often in people who maybe have had to face adversity in their life already. Now, that is impressive, but she has been dealing with a life of adversity. So overcoming another challenge was just something for her. What I found equally impressive is the rest of her team, who maybe perhaps not as used to overcoming these challenges, but from the engagement in the programs that we have here in the school, we're able to accept their classmate on this expedition, knowing that she was going to potentially have struggles with it, knowing that her paddle output was maybe not going to be as high, but still knowing this is a member of our class, this is a member of our team. We've started this expedition together and we are going to finish it together. And there was no complaints, no issues, everyone happily volunteering to take their turn in the boat, to get the most out of the team. So make sure that, because when we go on the expedition, we have 4 teams or 5 teams, but those teams are still one larger group. So they're functioning within their team, but it's important that the groups stay with the entire group stays within a manageable distance of each other. And there was the grit, the determination, the resilience to see this taking place in real time in front of you, knowing that these students will reflect upon it later, and the pride that they'll take in completing it is just phenomenal. Yeah, Dylan, do you maybe want to share a little bit about yours?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, just to comment on the photo, it's amazing. And some of the work I've done with a lot of athletes, there's obviously athletes who have like various like disabilities as well, and it's such an inspiring place to be, to see somebody like that. It also kind of like puts things into perspective for yourself, where you're like, oh, I'm so tired, and you like see somebody who's still going like that, and you're like, okay, hold on, maybe I'm just being a bit lazy. But yeah, as far as like for me goes, there's obviously I've probably like touched on a lot of the benefits for me personally, and like you said, that whole looking back on my life and those kind of things. There's also sort of a sense of being able to be calm under pressure that I think is extremely valuable, or being able to be calm in situations that like maybe aren't calm, and in like life that obviously can happen in various different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be out on an adventure, but there's like you don't make any good decisions out of a place of being in like a panic. And with things like COVID and when all those kind of things were happening, everybody had their own kind of situation, and there was a lot of like panic going around. And to be able to apply those kind of things to yourself and be able to be calm in like a situation, it also helps you be able to think more clearly about making a good decision after that. If you're making a decision from a place of panic, you're just like swinging at things, and you might luckily hit the right thing, but the chance of it isn't very high. You're going to end up hurting somebody else. Or so yeah, to be able to be calm in like situations that are very high pressure is for me something that's been like very valuable. And then also just as far as like work goes, on like a work kind of perspective, for example, that Zambia trip, the group of people that I went with, because we went through that whole situation with me, and they knew how I would be in a situation that was quite high risk. Because of that, they've now asked me to come on more work. And, you know, so it's actually literally played into me getting like more work in what I do, because I'm not employed by anybody. So I'm not constantly getting work. So it's always helpful to have, you know, those like personal skills that actually end up coming back and helping out in like a business way as well.
That's great. I think that brings us to the end of the slides that we've had to cover. I'll maybe pass it back to you, Laurel.
Yeah, thank you so much, Rob and Dylan. It's so enjoyable as a listener to hear about your perspectives on personal challenge and adventure. And I feel kind of that excitement rising up in me of what new personal adventure might be coming. It's always nice to open and close at a UWC with a Kurt Hahn quote, but this is one that we really connect to a lot. There exists within everyone a grand passion, an outlandish thirst for adventure, a desire to live boldly and vividly through the journey of life. I definitely think we've seen a lot of that today in what we've been able to appreciate from Dylan and Rob's perspectives. We have a couple of questions that have popped into the chat. If anyone has any additional questions that they would like to ask, please feel free to raise your digital hand, or you can throw it into the chat as well. One question that came in from Phil is, have you been in this situation where you have had an outdoor education objective, but there's no nature around you? So any advice on outdoor education or adventure when you don't have the beautiful nature that Phuket or Costa Rica or all of these other beautiful places that we've been fortunate to be in presents to us?
I mean, it is something that is developing more and more. Having the outdoor experiences with the nature that we're blessed with here in Phuket is obviously fantastic, but it still comes with its challenges. And just, you know, being here in Phuket doesn't mean that we have access to absolutely everything. For example, there's very few maps of the national parkland that we go into. So we have to develop our own maps or work in cooperation with the rangers whenever we go into these spaces. So we've got a lot here, but it also takes a lot to get that going and get that off the ground. And it's based, you know, putting in the hours, creating that as well. I think if we're in the UK or the States or a few other places where outdoor education has been more developed for a longer period of time, then you've got these national institutions that help facilitate that. In terms of outdoor experiences within city environments, there are some options. Again, it depends what it looks like. If you're looking for that type 1 type of fun, rock climbing gyms offer that a lot. So that those rock climbing experiences, indoor walls, there's a number of places, you know, in most cities around the world now that they have those. To maybe reference some of the work that the Duke of Edinburgh are doing, and we run the Duke of Edinburgh International Award here at the school as well. And I myself sit on an advisory committee for that. And with a lot of countries going through the last couple of years of COVID and having to adapt to maybe not getting to the places they ran expeditions in the past, there's been a lot of work done to develop more exploration types of learning. So whilst it maybe isn't outdoor education, it is still education outside the classroom. You can take a place-based theory and apply it to the context of a city. Most cities have parks to explore. There's a number of apps out there like geocaching and what 3 words that create adventure in cityscapes as well. And it depends what you have access to. Obviously, cycling is a very more easily accessible in the city, depending on the type of city that you live in. But there are certainly options out there to be explored. And just because you're in a city doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be as limited as perhaps maybe some people might think. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Rob. All right, so I'm going to close with a question that came in through the private chat. People are curious after hearing about your adventures. Dylan and Rob, what is your next personal challenge that's coming that you're the most excited about?
Dylan.
I'm trying to think because like this call was my next one, but now that it's over, I think this next job that I'm going on, which I'm not allowed to really say too much about it, but we are busy with an animal like relocation project that we're going to be filming. So it's going to be a very big one. There's definitely a lot out of my comfort zone with that. So that's from this weekend. I think that's probably my next. Yeah, that's definitely my next personal challenge.
For me, there's one that I've been thinking about doing for a while now. We'll have to wait maybe until October or November time to give it a try. It's something I've talked about with some of my colleagues in the office, is a paddle round the island of Phuket, like a complete circumnavigation. We do quite a lot of it on our expedition with the students, which is why I've kind of put it off, because I do it on a regular basis once a year. But that opportunity to actually do a solo paddle with a paddle with a couple of close friends, so that we're maybe pushing ourselves to our extent, instead of doing the pace and the timing that our students do, and allowing for that, where we can actually say, okay, how long does it take us to get around the island, and really pushing it that way. There's the other option, though, if we don't want to feel too challenged, and what we're lucky in Phuket is we could do that paddle around the island, but instead of camping, we could stop at 5-star hotels. That has been floated. I'm not sure how if that's what we're doing.
There's some kind of cheating in there somewhere.
Just a touch. Just a touch.
Oh, well, it sounds amazing. We hope that you have been as inspired by listening to Rob and Dylan today talk about their adventures as I have been. Wishing you all just lots of wonderful adventures to come. Many people come from our webinars and wonder a little bit more about UWC Thailand. So we'll end with a bit of an informational video that's quite short, that will show you a little bit about what this kind of adventurous learning looks like in action, and then come back to share with you our final webinar for the year, which should be a really fun one. So here comes the video first. Every time I watch that video, I think, why did I not go to UWC Thailand when I was a child? So a lot of people are very interested in our boarding program. And so we're bringing back an additional webinar for boarding that comes in June. So if you're interested in the benefits of boarding school, we would love to invite you to join us then. With much appreciation for everyone taking the time to join us today. Thank you to Rob Carmichael. Thank you to Dylan Haskin, and to all of you for taking the time to join us. We hope to see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone.